teenager pretended to mow my whole lawn, and his parents marched onto my porch and called the cops on me when I refused to pay him. My son showed up, and suddenly they were the ones sweating. I am 73. I have lived in the same house for 36 years on a quiet street where the neighbors have known each other for decades. My son lives 20 minutes away. I still do most of my own yard work, but my hip had been bothering me that summer. So when a teenager from a few houses down knocked on my door the second weekend of June and offered to mow my lawn for $100, I said yes. His name was Easton. He was 15 or 16 years old, polite enough at the door, with a small mower in the back of his father's pickup. He was saving up for a summer trip. He was a teenager trying to earn money, and I had a sore hip, so I went back inside and let him work. Easton started up the mower at the front and spent about 20 minutes on the front strip. I watched him through the window. He did a fast, uneven job that left whole patches uncut, but I told myself he would clean it up in the back. Then he moved the mower around to the side, out of sight. I could hear the engine running. 20 minutes later, it stopped, and a few minutes after that, the doorbell rang. Easton was on my porch with his hand out. He told me he had finished and was ready for his $100. I asked him to wait a minute. I walked out to the front yard, around to the side, and then to the back. The front strip was the same uneven mess I had seen through the window. The side strip had not been mowed. The grass was just slightly flattened in two stripes where he had rolled the mower over without engaging the blade. The whole backyard had not been touched. Not one blade of grass had been cut behind my house. The mower had been running, but he had been sitting on it. I told Easton very calmly that the only part mowed was the front strip, and that it was done so badly I would have to redo it anyway. I told him I would pay $20 for the work he had actually done, but not $100 for a lawn he had not cut. He took the 20, told me he was going to talk to his dad about this, and walked off down the driveway. An hour later, the doorbell rang again. Easton's father and mother were on my porch. The father was a big man named Doug, in a work jacket. His wife Maureen was a small woman with very loud opinions. Easton stood behind them on the steps, looking smug. Doug told me his son had spent the whole morning mowing my lawn, and that I was trying to stiff a kid out of his money. I told Doug, very calmly, that I would walk all three of them around the side so they could see for themselves that the backyard had not been touched. Maureen cut me off. She told me elderly people in this neighborhood always try to weasel out of paying, and that I owed Easton the full $100 plus another $50 for gas and the stress of having to come over. I told them, very calmly, to leave my porch. Doug told me he was not going anywhere until I paid. Maureen said they were going to call the police and have me charged with theft of services. I told her, very calmly, that I would actually like her to do that, and the officer was welcome to walk around to my backyard. Maureen pulled out her phone and made the call right there on my porch. While she was on the line, I went inside and called my son Adrian. I told him 3 people were refusing to leave my porch and that the police were on the way. He told me he was already getting in the car. The officer arrived first, a young man named Frank, in his late 20s. Maureen launched into a long, loud version of the story in which her son had cut my whole lawn beautifully, and I had refused to pay him. The officer asked me what I had to say. I told him I would walk him around to the back. We walked. Doug and Maureen followed, still talking the whole way. The officer looked at the front strip, then the untouched side, then the full uncut backyard, and turned to Maureen. He asked her very politely where on this property she believed her son had been mowing for the last 40 minutes. Maureen told him I had probably let the grass grow back already. That was when Adrian's car pulled up. He got out, walked across my front lawn in his weekend clothes, came around to the back, and introduced himself to the officer by name and by title. The officer recognized him on the second word and straightened up. Doug and Maureen did not recognize him at all because they had never bothered to ask what my son did. Adrian then turned to Doug and Maureen and explained very calmly the legal definition of harassment of a vulnerable adult: trespass after being asked to leave and filing a false police report. Doug's face went red all the way to the tops of his ears. He took a step toward Adrian and said he did not care who Adrian was, that I had agreed to pay his son $100 and I was going to pay it. His voice was loud and hard, the kind of voice that probably worked on most people. Adrian did not move. He looked at Doug the way you look at someone who has no idea how much trouble they are in and said, very calmly, would you like to repeat that demand in front of this officer? Because I want to make sure he hears it clearly. Doug opened his mouth, then closed it. Frank stepped between them and told Doug to take a step back, and Doug actually listened. That was when Maureen made her move. She turned to the officer and said I had grabbed her son's arm when he came to the door to collect his pay, that I had been aggressive with him, and that was why he was scared to finish the job. I felt like all the air had left my lungs. I looked right at the officer and said that was an absolute lie, that I had never touched that boy. Not his arm, not his shoulder, not anything. That he came to my door, I paid him $20 for the work he actually did, and he walked away on his own. Adrian stepped toward Maureen and told her that a formal false statement to a police officer is a separate criminal charge, and that if she wanted to sign her name to what she had just said, they could absolutely arrange that right now. The officer looked at Easton, who had been standing behind his parents the whole time like he was trying to become part of the fence, and asked him directly whether this woman had touched him or threatened him in any way when he was at her door. Easton's eyes went straight to his mother. Maureen was staring at him with a look that could have burned a hole through drywall. Easton stood there for what felt like a full minute, then looked down at his shoes and mumbled that no, she did not do anything like that. The officer told Maureen that her own son had just contradicted what she told him and asked if she would like to revise her statement. Maureen said Easton was scared and did not know what he was saying. Adrian said he could produce 5 neighbors who had known me for decades and would confirm my character within the hour, and asked how many neighbors she thought would vouch for hers. Maureen opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The officer walked the yard one more time, then came back and told Doug and Maureen that the physical evidence supported the homeowner's account. There was no basis for a theft of services complaint, and they needed to leave the property now. Doug turned and walked toward the side of the house without a word. Maureen looked at me and said this was not over. Adrian spoke before she made it 3 steps. He told her that if she came back to my porch or contacted me in any way, he would file for a protective order the next business day, and the officer could confirm he had grounds. Maureen stopped walking. She stood there with her back to all of us for a second, then kept going. Frank took my full statement on the porch while Adrian made sure every detail got written down. The uncut grass, the $20, the false claim about me grabbing Easton, all all of it. That evening, Maureen started knocking on doors. I found out 30 minutes later when my phone rang. It was Irina, my best friend of 20 years, 4 houses down, and her voice was tight. She said Maureen had told her I had assaulted her son and the police had to come break it up, and that she was going door to door. I told Irina the whole story. When I finished, she said she believed me. She had always believed me. But Maureen was telling a very convincing version, and some people were listening. Adrian had heard enough of the call from the dining table to know what was happening. And the second I hung up, he said we needed to get ahead of this. He told me not to go door to door myself, that it would only make me look defensive, and instead to call Irina and ask her to come over. Irina was through my front door in 15 minutes, still in her house shoes. Adrian sat her down and explained everything, then pulled out his phone and showed her a photo he had taken of the backyard before we came inside. Clear light, grass up to my shins, completely untouched, fence line visible. Irina looked at the photo and said that boy had not cut 1 inch of that backyard. Adrian asked if she would be willing to tell the truth to anyone Maureen had talked to. Irina did not even hesitate. She said she would do more than that. She would call the people she knew tonight and set the record straight. By the next evening, she had reached 6 neighbors. 4 had already doubted Maureen's story because they knew me. The other 2 were not sure, but after Irina talked to them and one came to see my yard with her own eyes, all 6 were on my side. On the 3rd morning, I walked out to get my mail and found a handwritten note tucked inside the mailbox. No envelope, just a folded piece of lined paper. The handwriting was neat, careful, like someone had taken their time. It said I owed the Wilcox family $150, pay up, or they would make sure everyone on the street knew what kind of person I was. I stood there at the end of my own driveway holding that piece of paper and felt something shift in my chest, something harder than fear and quieter than anger. I called Adrian. His voice went very quiet, the kind of quiet that is worse than yelling. He told me not to touch the note any more than I already had, to set it on the counter and not fold it, and that he was coming over right now. He was through my front door in under 20 minutes. He photographed the note from several angles, then went outside and photographed my mailbox from the front, the side, and from the street. He came back in and told me that placing a threatening note in someone's mailbox by hand, with no stamp, is a federal offense. No return address, no postmark. Someone had walked it over and stuck it in by hand. He put the note into a plastic bag from the cabinet, sealed it, and wrote the date on the outside. He told me to keep it somewhere safe and not show it to anyone except the police. That afternoon, I was sitting on my front porch when I heard Doug's pickup come around the corner moving slow, the speed you drive when you want someone to see you, and it rolled past my house. I watched the truck turn at the end of the block. 10 minutes later, it came back. Same slow speed. I noted the exact time of both passes. I went inside, locked every door, and called Adrian. He told me he was filing the protective order first thing in the morning, that if they came to my door, I should not open it, and to call the police first, and then him. 5 days after the original incident, I was out front with the hose, watering the flower bed along the walkway. I was not thinking about Maureen or Doug or any of it. Then I heard footsteps on the driveway. I looked up and saw Easton walking toward me alone. No parents, no smug look, no mower in a truck bed. Just a teenager in a wrinkled t-shirt and basketball shorts with his shoulders pulled in like he was trying to take up as little space as possible. He stopped at the edge of the walkway and said, "Ma'am, can I talk to you for a minute?" His voice was quiet. Not the voice of a kid who had stood on my porch with his hand out. I turned off the hose and said yes. Easton did not look at me right away. He looked at the ground, at his own shoes. Then he took a breath and said he did not mow my backyard, did not mow my side yard, barely did the front. He sat on the mower and let it run because he did not feel like doing the work and figured I would not check. He said it fast, like he had practiced it on the walk over. After a few seconds, he looked up just enough that I could see his eyes and said his mother had told him to tell his dad he finished the whole thing. She told him to say that. When his dad went to my door, his mother knew the lawn was not done. She just thought I would pay anyway because I was old. I stood there on my own walkway and felt 2 things at once. Anger. Real anger that started low in my stomach and spread up through my chest because this woman had known. She had sent her husband to my door anyway. Stood on my porch and demanded money she knew I did not owe. Then lied to a police officer and gone door to door telling my neighbors I was violent and crazy. And all of it had started with her telling her son to lie. And sadness because this kid could not even look me in the eye and had been put in that position by his own mother. She had taught him to cheat, told him to lie about it, and when the whole thing fell apart, she used him as a shield and then blamed him for the mess she made. I asked him why he was telling me this now. His face changed, his jaw went tight, and his eyes got wet, and he said because his mother had found out about the court filing and had been screaming at his father all week and told him this was all his fault and that he had ruined the family, but she was the one who told him to lie. His voice cracked on that last word, just a small break. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled $20 bill and held it out with his arm straight. He said he should not have taken the 20 either. He had not earned it. I looked at that bill in his hand. I looked at this boy who had walked over by himself without his parents knowing, to say the honest words out loud, which was something his mother had never done once in all of this. I told him to keep it. I said you earned this visit more than you earned that mow. Something moved across his face that might have been relief, or might have been shame, or might have been both at once. He said he was sorry, and it sounded like he meant it. Then he turned and walked back down my driveway with his head down and his hands in his pockets. I called Adrian the moment I was back inside. I told him everything, including the part that mattered most, that Easton had told me Maureen had instructed him to tell his father the job was finished, that she knew the lawn was not done, and that she believed I would just pay because I was old. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Then he said Maureen had not just supported a false complaint, she had orchestrated it. He said he was adding Easton's statement to the file, and when they walked into that hearing, they were going to find out their own son had told the truth. The hearing was held in a small room at the county courthouse, a plain room with a table on each side and a desk at the front where the judge sat. I walked in with Adrian. Doug, Maureen, and Easton came in a few minutes later. Maureen was dressed up, her chin high, looking like she had come to win something. Doug was stiff, arms crossed, face set. Yeah, Easton sat between his parents and would not look at anyone. The judge, an older man with gray hair and reading glasses, reviewed the file, then told Adrian he could present his case. Adrian did not rush. He laid out the the original incident, then placed the photographs on the table one at a time, each labeled with the date and the area of the yard it showed. The front strip with its uneven patches and missed sections. The side yard with 2 flat stripes in otherwise tall grass. The backyard, completely untouched, grass up past the ankle, not a single cut line anywhere. He placed the officer's report next and told the judge that Frank had walked the entire property and confirmed the physical evidence matched my account. The judge examined each photo carefully, then looked at Doug and Maureen. He asked Doug whether he had inspected the lawn before going to my door to demand payment. Doug put his hands on the table, then took them off and put them in his lap. He said his son told him he finished. He took his word for it. His voice was flat, like a man answering a question he should have asked himself weeks ago. The judge turned to Maureen. She sat up straighter and said she had trusted her son. Any mother would. Adrian then picked up a single sheet from his folder. He told the judge that 5 days after the original incident, Easton had come to my home alone, without his parents' knowledge, and made an admission. Then Adrian read it out loud. Easton had said he did not mow the backyard, did not mow the side yard, barely mowed the front, and had sat on the mower and let it run because he did not feel like working. And then Adrian read the part that mattered most. He read that Easton had told me his mother had instructed him to tell his father the job was finished, that she knew the lawn was not done, and that she believed I would just pay because I was old. The room went very still. Maureen's face went white. She stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor and said that was a lie. Her son would never say that. The judge looked at her and said, "Ma'am, sit down." 2 words. Maureen sat. Her hands were shaking. The judge turned to Easton. Easton had been sitting with his shoulders pulled forward and his head down since the hearing started. The judge said he was going to ask a question and needed an honest answer. Did his mother tell him to say he had finished the lawn when he had not? The room went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind where you can hear the air system in the ceiling and the clock on the wall and your own heartbeat in your ears. I looked at Maureen. She was staring at her son so hard it looked like she was trying to reach inside his head and pull the words out before he could say them. Easton looked down at his hands. He turned them over in his lap, palms up, then palms down. The seconds stretched. Then he looked up at the judge, not at his mother, not at his father, and said very quietly, "Yes, sir." She told him to tell his dad he was done. She said the lady would just pay because she was old and would not check. Maureen made a sound like the air had been knocked out of her chest. She put her hand over her mouth and stared at her son. Doug turned and looked at his wife. I had seen anger on Doug's face, stubbornness, bluster, but this was something I had never seen before. It was understanding. The look of a man who had pushed a suspicion down for a long time because it was easier to be mad at me than to look at what was sitting right next to him. That suspicion had just become a fact, spoken out loud by his own son in front of a judge, and Doug looked at Maureen like he was seeing her clearly for the first time in years. The judge went through the rest of the file piece by piece. The neighbor statements documenting Maureen's door-to-door campaign, the unsigned note placed by hand in my mailbox, the record of Doug's truck passing my house twice in 10 minutes. He told them the pattern constituted harassment of a senior resident, that the false statements to the officer and to multiple neighbors could have consequences beyond this hearing, and that the unsigned note was still under investigation. Then he granted the protective order. No contact in person, by phone, in writing, or through anyone else. No entry onto my property. No communication about me to third parties. Violation meant arrest. Not a warning, not a second chance. Arrest. He looked directly at Maureen and told her she had called the police on a 73-year-old woman because her son did not mow her lawn, gone door to door telling her neighbors she was violent and mentally incompetent, and that her own son had just told this court she instructed him to lie. He said the order was not a suggestion. It was a legal boundary. If she crossed it, she would be arrested. He said each sentence slowly, like he was making sure every word had time to land. Maureen did not say a word. For the first time since I had known her, she had absolutely nothing to say. Doug stood up, pushed his chair back, and walked out of the room without looking at anyone. Easton followed his father with his head down and his hands in his pockets. Maureen sat there alone for a few seconds, then picked up her purse, stood up, and walked out without looking at anyone. Adrian and I walked out of the courthouse and across the parking lot. The air outside was flat and still. We got into the car and pulled onto the main road. He drove. I watched the buildings pass. We did not talk for the first several minutes. At some point, he turned on the radio and then turned it off again. We stopped at a light and I looked at a woman walking a dog on the far corner and neither of us said anything about it. He pulled onto my street and parked in front of the house. I got out and walked to the door. That evening, the street went quiet. Doug's truck sat in the driveway 3 houses down. I went inside, turned off the porch light, and left the grass for another day.